The crew did not gather in that trailer to witness a fight. They came for a routine table read for the next Fast and Furious film. But everything stopped the moment Dwayne Johnson leaned across the table and looked Paul Walker dead in the eyes. Because what The Rock said next was meant to humiliate him in front of every single cast member. But no one in that room knew Paul Walker had been carrying a folded letter in his back pocket for over 3 years, and the moment he placed it on that table, Dwayne Johnson would never look at him the same way again. The trailer felt smaller than it actually was. It was parked on the edge of the studio lot in Atlanta, surrounded by cables, lighting rigs, and the low hum of generators that never seemed to stop. Inside, the air conditioning was on full blast, but it did not help. 11 people were crammed around a long folding table, and the tension had been building since Dwayne Johnson walked in 20 minutes late. Paul Walker sat at the far end with his script open in front of him, a yellow highlighter in his hand, and a quiet calm on his face that made the rest of the cast slightly uncomfortable. He had already marked his pages. He had already done the work. He was ready. Vin Diesel sat at the head of the table, leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed, watching the room like a man who already knew what was coming. Tyrese Gibson scrolled through his phone. Michelle Rodriguez sipped coffee from a paper cup, glancing occasionally at Paul, then at Dwayne, then back at her script. The director cleared his throat to begin, but the words barely made it out before Dwayne interrupted. Dwayne leaned forward slowly, placed both elbows on the table, and turned his head toward Paul. His voice was low, almost casual, the kind of tone you use when you pretend to make a joke, but everyone in the room knows you are not joking at all. He said, "You know something, Paul? I have been thinking about this scene we are about to read, and I keep coming back to the same question." The room went quiet. The director set down his pen. Paul did not look up. Dwayne continued, "You know how you got this part, right?" Paul finally lifted his eyes. He did not say anything. He just looked at Dwayne with that same steady calm, the same slight tilt of the head he had carried since he was a kid in Sunland, California. Dwayne smiled, but it was not a kind smile. It was the kind of smile a man wears when he has been waiting weeks to say something cruel, and has finally decided this was the moment. He said, "You only got this role because Vin felt sorry for you. You know that, right? Everyone here knows that. The studio knows that. Vin carried you through the first 3 movies, and now he is carrying you through this one too." The room froze. Tyrese stopped scrolling. Michelle set down her coffee. Vin Diesel did not move, but his jaw tightened in a way that everyone except Dwayne noticed. The director opened his mouth to say something, then closed it again. He was not paid enough to step into the middle of whatever this was. Paul Walker did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. He did not even close his script. He simply set down his highlighter, leaned back slightly in his chair, and looked at Dwayne with an expression that was almost patient, almost sympathetic. Like a man watching a friend make a mistake he could not take back. Then Paul reached into the back pocket of his jeans and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was worn at the edges, yellowed slightly, the creases deep from being folded and unfolded 100 times. He placed it on the table in front of him, smoothed it flat with the side of his hand, and said quietly, "You might want to read this before you say another word." Dwayne laughed, but it was a short laugh, uncertain. He glanced at Vin, who said nothing. He glanced at the director, who looked away. He glanced at Michelle, who was now staring at Dwayne with something close to disappointment. Finally, Dwayne reached across the table and picked up the letter. He unfolded it slowly. The room watched in complete silence as his eyes moved across the first line, then the second line, then the third. Dwayne Johnson, the most physically imposing man in Hollywood, the man who had built his entire brand on never backing down, slowly lowered the letter to the table. His face had gone pale. His jaw was clenched so tight a muscle was visibly twitching beneath his skin. He did not look up. He could not look up. Because what was written on that piece of paper was not what anyone in that trailer had expected. The letter was dated 3 years earlier. It was handwritten in a familiar block print, and at the top corner was a logo Dwayne recognized immediately. It was from the studio executive who had personally fought to keep Dwayne in the franchise after his first film performance had drawn mixed reactions. The letter detailed a closed-door meeting where the executives had seriously considered replacing Dwayne with another actor for the upcoming sequel. The reason was simple. They felt his on-screen presence was overpowering the ensemble. They felt audiences were responding to him as a solo act, not as part of a team. And in that meeting, according to the letter, only one person had stood up and defended Dwayne Johnson. Only one person had argued, passionately and at length, that Dwayne was essential to the future of the franchise. That person was Paul Walker. Dwayne kept reading. Paul had argued for over an hour in that meeting. He had cited specific scenes where Dwayne had elevated the material. He had pointed to box office numbers, audience reactions, and even fan mail. He had told the executives that if they replaced Dwayne, he himself would walk away from the franchise. The letter ended with a thank you note from the studio executive, expressing gratitude for Paul's intervention and confirming that based on his arguments alone, Dwayne would be retained for all future films. The signature at the bottom was unmistakable. Dwayne stared at it for a long time. The trailer had gone so quiet that the only sound was the hum of the air conditioning and the distant beep of a forklift. Somewhere on the lot, Tyrese had not moved. Michelle was looking down at her hands. Vin Diesel was watching Paul with an expression no one in that room had ever seen before. It was something between pride and grief. Dwayne finally looked up. His eyes were glassy. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked at Paul, and Paul looked back at him with that same calm, that same steady patience. No anger, no satisfaction, no hint of triumph, just quiet. Dwayne tried to say something, but his voice cracked, and he had to clear his throat twice before he could speak. He said, "Why did you never tell me?" Paul shrugged slightly, a small, almost imperceptible movement, and said, "Because it was not about getting credit. It was about doing the right thing. You earned your place in this franchise the same way I earned mine. Through the work, through the hours, through the love we both have for these characters. I did not fight for you because I felt sorry for you. I fought for you because you belonged here, and I knew it before the studio did." Dwayne lowered his head. His shoulders dropped. The man who had walked into that trailer 20 minutes late, full of confidence and ready to put Paul Walker in his place, was now sitting in his chair like a man who had just been given news he could not process. He pressed his palms flat against the table and closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, he looked at Paul one more time and said, in a voice barely above a whisper, "I owe you an apology." Paul shook his head and said, "No, you do not. You owe yourself one." The director cleared his throat softly and asked if anyone needed a break before they continued. No one moved. Vin Diesel finally uncrossed his arms, leaned forward, and quietly said, "Let us begin." The cast picked up their scripts. Paul folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into his pocket. From that day forward, Dwayne Johnson never publicly questioned Paul Walker's place in the Fast and Furious family again. And those who had been in that trailer noticed something different about how Dwayne treated Paul on set. He listened more, he asked for his input, and whenever Paul walked into a room, Dwayne was the first person to stand and greet him. Years later, after the world lost Paul Walker in that devastating accident on the 30th of November, 2013, Dwayne Johnson was asked in a private interview about the colleagues who had shaped his career the most. When he came to Paul, his voice grew quiet. He said that Paul was the kind of man who carried other people without ever asking for thanks. The kind of man who fought battles on your behalf in rooms you would never enter. He said the thing that haunted him most was the apology he had wanted to expand on, the gratitude he had never put into proper words. Whether the events unfolded exactly as remembered, the larger truth remains undisputed. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel for more untold moments from the lives of the people we think we know. We share stories that never made it to the headlines, the conversations behind closed doors, the quiet acts of courage that shaped careers and changed lives forever. Drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever stood up for someone who had no idea you were fighting for them? Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that the people who carry us through life often do so in silence.